The auctioneer called it a paperweight. He held the old brass compass up to the crowd, turned it once under the warehouse lights, and laughed into the microphone. "Folks, this thing doesn't even point north anymore. $20. Somebody put it on a shelf." The room chuckled. A man in the third row raised a hand and won it for 22. Nobody in that building knew they had just sold an object that 3 governments had spent 4 decades trying to make disappear. And the old man who had brought it there, sitting alone near the back in a gray windbreaker, watched it leave his hands and felt something he had not allowed himself to feel since the winter he chose to disappear. He felt found. From which city in the world are you watching this story today? Drop your location in the comments below. And if you believe some truths refuse to stay buried, subscribe now. Because what that broken compass proved would bring 2 federal agents to a maritime auction house within 48 hours. And what the old man told them made one of them lower his eyes and go quiet for a long, long time. Caleb Strand was 24 years old, and he collected things that other people threw away. He worked weekends at the Harborline Auction House on the wet edge of a fishing town in coastal Maine, cataloging the contents of estates whose owners had died without anyone to grieve them. Boxes of letters, tarnished medals, fishing reels seized with rust. Caleb had a gift for it. He could look at a corroded lump of metal and see the shape of the life that had carried it. His grandmother used to say he was born old, that he listened to objects the way other people listen to music. He had not meant to bid on the compass. He had meant to leave at noon. But when the auctioneer made his little joke and the crowd laughed, Caleb watched the old man near the back, and the old man did not laugh. He sat perfectly still with his hands folded in his lap, and his eyes followed the compass with the focus of someone watching a child cross a busy street. So Caleb raised his hand. He paid $22 for a navigational instrument that supposedly could not navigate, and he told himself it was because he liked the brass. That was the first lie he told himself that day. There would be others. The compass was heavier than it should have been. Caleb noticed that immediately, back at the long cataloging table where the unsold lots waited. A standard brass marine compass of that era weighed perhaps a pound. This one felt closer to 2. The casing was scratched and salt-eaten, the glass clouded, and when he set it flat and turned it, the needle swung lazily and settled on a heading that was not north. It pointed somewhere just west of north and stayed there, stubborn, as though it had decided long ago that true north was a lie it refused to repeat. He almost shelved it then. A broken compass is a broken compass. But Caleb had cleaned 1,000 old instruments, and broken things broke in patterns he recognized. A cracked jewel bearing, a magnetized needle, a bent pivot. This needle was not stuck. It moved freely. It simply chose the wrong answer, every time, with absolute consistency. And consistency, Caleb had learned, was never an accident. He unscrewed the back. What he found beneath the dial was not the simple magnet and pivot of a marine compass. It was a second, smaller brass plate, machined with a precision that did not belong to the 1940s or 50s, etched with a grid of tiny numbers and a row of letters that meant nothing to him. And pressed into the very center, almost invisible under decades of grime, were 2 words in stamped capitals and a string of figures, deviation table, and then a sequence that began with letters, not numbers. He had never seen a serial format like it on any instrument. It ended in a dash and a single letter, -K. He stared at it longer than he meant to. Then he heard a voice behind him, quiet and even. "You weren't supposed to open that." But here is the part nobody warned Caleb about. The old man had not gone home. Edrin Vale was 81 years old, and he had spent 50 of those years being someone he was not. He stood at the edge of the cataloging table in his gray windbreaker, hands still folded the way they had been at the auction, and he looked at the open compass the way a man looks at an old photograph of a face he loved and lost. He did not look angry. He looked tired in a way that had nothing to do with the hour. "I sold it," Edrin said. "It wasn't supposed to be opened, just sold, just let go." Caleb felt the strange weight of the moment settle over him. "You're the man from the auction. I'm the man who brought it in." Edrin lowered himself slowly into the chair across the table, every motion deliberate, conserving something. Caleb noticed it the way he noticed the weight of the brass. A pattern. The old man did not move like the elderly usually moved, all hesitation and apology. He moved like someone who had once been trained to make no wasted motion at all, and the training had never fully left. "It points west of north," Caleb said. "It's been doing it the whole time. It's not broken." For the first time, something flickered across the old man's face. Not surprise, recognition. "No," he said softly. "It's not broken. It's never been broken. It's doing exactly what it was built to do." He reached out one finger, did not touch the compass, just hovered over the small etched plate. That deviation, that error, it's not an error, it's a key. A key to what? Edrin Vale looked at the young man for a long moment, and something in his expression shifted, as though he were running a calculation he had run 1,000 times, and had always, until now, decided against. "To a place," he finally said, "that officially does not exist. To a thing I helped sink in the winter of 1971. And to a name they erased so completely that even my own headstone has someone else's life carved on it." The fluorescent lights hummed. Somewhere in the warehouse, a forklift beeped and went silent. Caleb did not breathe. "Who are you?" he asked. "That," the old man said, "is the most dangerous question anyone has asked me in 40 years. And that's when things took the turn that Caleb would spend the rest of his life trying to understand. To explain what the compass was, Edrin Vale had to explain who he had been, and to do that he had to go back to a winter that the history books did not record. He spoke quietly, glancing once at the warehouse doors, and as he spoke, Caleb felt the cataloguing table and the rust and the salt air dissolve, replaced by something colder and farther away. In the winter of 1969, a young naval officer named Edrin Vale had been recruited out of a hydrographic survey unit into a program that had no name on any document. The men who recruited him called it, when they had to call it anything, the Lattice. Its purpose was simple to state and impossible to admit: to map with absolute secrecy the routes that foreign vessels were using to move men and material along a contested coastline far from home, and when the map was complete, to make certain ships disappear in ways that could never be traced to any flag. Edrin's specialty was the ocean itself. He understood magnetic deviation, the way the Earth's field bent and lied near certain ore deposits and certain man-made structures, the way a compass could be made to point not where the world was, but where you wanted it pointed. And the Lattice needed exactly that. They needed a navigational system that could guide their own small vessels to coordinates that appeared nowhere on a chart, that left no waypoint, no log, no electronic signature, coordinates encoded into the one instrument every sailor carried and no one ever suspected: the deviation table, the deliberate error. A trained operator who knew the offset could read the compass's wrong heading, apply the encoded correction etched on the inner plate, and arrive at a position that the compass itself seemed to be hiding. To anyone else, it was a broken instrument that pointed west of north. To the men of the Lattice, it was a map of a war that was never declared. "There were 9 of us," Edrin said. 9 operators who carried the modified compasses. We had designations, not names, when we worked. Mine was Kestrel. He paused. "K. The serial ends in K because the compass was issued to me. It's the only one of the 9 that was never recovered. They believe it went down with the others. They believe I went down with it." "What happened in 1971? Caleb asked. The old man's jaw tightened. "A ship," he said. "A freighter that wasn't a freighter, running a cargo that would have changed the course of an entire conflict if it reached harbor. We were ordered to make sure it never did, and we did our jobs." He looked at his folded hands. 3 of the 9 didn't come back from that night. The waters off that coast in February, there's no mercy in them. The official story, written years later when fragments of the program began to leak, was that a survey vessel was lost with all hands in a storm. A tragic accident. 9 men, gone. His voice did not break, but it thinned, the way ice thins before it gives. It was easier that way. A program is easy to bury if everyone who carried it is already in the ground. But you weren't in the ground. No. Edrin Vale met his eyes. I made it to shore, and when I understood that the men who ran the lattice had decided we were more useful dead than alive, I made a choice. I let the lie stand. I let Edrin Vale drown in February of 1971. I came home under another name to a country that thought it had already buried me, and I have lived in this town for 49 years as a quiet man who fixes boat engines and keeps to himself. He almost smiled. Nobody asks a boat mechanic about his past. Caleb's mind was racing. Then why now? Why bring the compass here? Why let it go? Because I'm dying, Edrin said, with no drama at all, the way another man might mention rain. The doctors gave me a season, maybe two, and I realize that when I go, the last proof goes with me. The compass is the only physical thing left that the lattice existed, the only object whose serial they can trace, whose deviation table they can read, that proves 9 men did something this country has never admitted and never honored. He looked at the open instrument on the table. I didn't want to take it to the ground. I wanted to leave it somewhere it would be found by someone who'd look closely, someone who'd notice the weight was wrong, someone who'd open it. A cold feeling moved up Caleb's spine. You sold it on purpose, to someone who'd find what it was. I hoped, the old man said. I didn't know it would be a boy who collects broken things and listens to them. But yes, I hoped. But that wasn't the most dangerous part of what Edrin had done. Because the moment Caleb had opened the compass and photographed the serial, deviation table, the encoded plate, the -K, and run a reverse image search and a registry lookup on his phone an hour earlier, idly, the way he checked every lot, he had done something the old man had spent 50 years avoiding. He had created a record. Caleb's phone buzzed against the wooden table. He glanced at it. An email, from no address he recognized. The sender field a single string of characters. The subject line read, Inquiry logged, Lattice Registry Serial -K. The body was one line. Who has handled this object? Respond within the hour. The old man saw Caleb's face change. What is it? Caleb turned the screen toward him. Edrin Vale read it, and for the first time since the auction, the perfect stillness left him. He went very pale and very calm, in the particular way that Caleb would later realize was not fear at all, but the opposite of fear. A man returning to a state he had trained for half a century ago and had hoped never to need again. They were watching the registry, Edrin said quietly. Of course they were. A dormant serial flag. 50 years, and they never took it down. He stood, and the conserving slowness was gone now, replaced by something economical and exact. You need to listen to me very carefully. You did nothing wrong, but you have started something that cannot be stopped now, and the next few hours matter more than you understand. Who are they? People who decided a long time ago that the easiest way to keep a secret is to make sure there's no one left to tell it. He looked toward the warehouse doors. Close early, lock the front, and whatever you do, do not answer that email. And the compass? Edrin Vale looked at the small brass instrument that had carried his whole erased life inside it for 50 years. Keep it where you can see it, he said. It's the only thing keeping both of us real. No one expected what came next, least of all Caleb, who had walked into work that morning expecting nothing but dust. They did not have to wait long. The next morning, before the auction house had even opened, a dark sedan with no plates, a fisherman would recognize pulled into the gravel lot, and 2 people stepped out who did not belong to a fishing town. A man and a woman, both in their 40s, in clothes that were trying very hard to look ordinary and failing in the small ways that trained eyes notice, the shoes too good, the posture too square, the way they scanned the lot in overlapping arcs before they ever reached the door. Caleb watched them come from behind the counter. Edrin Vale stood beside him, having arrived an hour earlier without being asked, as though he had known. The old man had told Caleb only one thing that morning. When they speak to you, Tell them exactly what you saw. The truth. Nothing invented, nothing held back about the object. But say nothing about me until I say my own name. That's mine to say. The bell over the door rang. The man entered first, the woman a half step behind and to the side, positioned, Caleb noticed, so that between them they could see the whole room. "Morning," the man said, with a smile that was pleasant and meant nothing. He produced a slim leather case and let it fall open for exactly the length of time required, and no longer. The letters on the identification were 3, and they were familiar, and they made the air in the room feel thinner. "We're following up on an inquiry that came through a federal registry yesterday afternoon, a navigational instrument. We understand it passed through this auction house." Caleb's mouth was dry. "We sell a lot of instruments. This one's specific." The woman spoke for the first time. Her voice was even, almost kind, and somehow worse for it. "Brass marine compass, non-standard weight, a serial designation ending in a letter. We'd like to see it, and we'd like the contact information for everyone who's handled it." Caleb felt 50 years of someone else's life pressing on him from the man at his side. He reached under the counter and set the compass on the glass. The change in both agents was immediate and almost involuntary. The man stopped smiling, the woman went still. The man reached out, did not pick it up, just looked at it the way Edrin had looked at it. And Caleb understood with a lurch that these two had been told about this object. That somewhere in a building with no name, this small piece of brass had a file, and these people had read it, and had perhaps never expected to see it with their own eyes. "Where did this come from?" the man asked, and the pleasantness was gone entirely now. "An estate lot," Caleb said. "Brought in by a private party." "Who?" And that was the moment Edrin Vale stepped forward. "Me," the old man said. Both agents turned to him, and for an instant they saw exactly what the auctioneer had seen, what the whole town had seen for 49 years. An elderly man in a grey windbreaker, a quiet local, no one. The woman's eyes had already begun to move past him, dismissing him, returning to Caleb. "Serial ends in K," Edrin said, and the woman's eyes snapped back. "Issued November 1969. The deviation table on the inner plate encodes a correction of 11 degrees, applied against magnetic heading, with a depth offset keyed to the 3rd column. The freighter went down on the night of February the 9th, 1971, at the corrected position, not the indicated one. There were 9 of us. You want to know who handled this object?" His voice did not rise. It did not need to. "I handled it for 50 years. It was issued to me." The man's hand had stopped halfway to the compass. He straightened slowly. "What was your designation?" "Kestrel." The temperature in the room seemed to drop. The woman took a step closer, studying the old man's face now with an intensity that had nothing to do with suspicion and everything to do with disbelief. "Kestrel is on the memorial," she said, almost to herself. "Lost at sea. February 71. I've seen the file. Kestrel is dead." "Kestrel is supposed to be dead," Edrin Vale said. "It was easier that way." The man pulled a phone from his jacket and stepped toward the back of the room, speaking low and fast. And though Caleb could not hear the words, he could hear the cadence, the clipped, urgent rhythm of someone reporting something that was not supposed to be possible. The woman did not move. She stood looking at Edrin Vale, and slowly, almost without seeming to decide to, her posture changed. Her shoulders squared, her chin lifted a fraction. "You held the line off that coast," she said quietly. "The whole program. Everything that came after, the routes we still use, the methods, the people who came home because of what your 9 men proved could be done. We were taught the doctrine. We were never taught the names. There were no names." Her voice caught, just slightly. "Because the names were all dead." "Not all," said Edrin Vale. The man came back from the corner. His face had changed in a way Caleb had never seen a stranger's face change. Gone formal, gone careful, gone reverent. He looked at the old man for a long moment. Then his hand rose toward his brow in the beginning of a salute, and he caught himself and lowered it, the way you do not salute in civilian clothes in a fishing town auction house. and the catching of it was somehow more powerful than the gesture would have been. "Sir," he said. Just that. "Sir, what do you think happened next? Drop your guess in the comments. And if stories about people history tried to erase mean something to you, subscribe now. Because what Edrin Vale said next, and what the agents were forced to decide, is the part of this story that the men who built the lattice never wanted anyone to hear. They did not take him in. That was the first surprise. Caleb had braced for it, had half expected the two agents to fold the old man into the back of the plateless sedan and erase him a second time. But the woman, who Caleb would only ever know as Agent Mara, made a single phone call of her own, and whatever was said on the other end changed the shape of the morning. "There are people who would prefer," she told Edrin carefully, "that this object and this conversation simply end here, quietly, the way these things have always ended." "I know exactly the kind of people you mean," Edrin said. "I worked for them. And there are people," she continued, "newer people who think this country owes a debt it has spent 50 years refusing to pay. I work for those people too." She looked at the compass on the glass counter. "If you disappear now, the way you were meant to in 71, that debt disappears with you. But you didn't disappear. You walked into a public auction in front of 40 witnesses and a registered sale and a young man who photographed the serial and backed it up to a server we don't control." She almost smiled. "You made yourself impossible to erase. That was deliberate." "I'm a careful man," Edrin Vale said. "I always was." The male agent, Reyes, the woman called him once, had been quiet, examining the inner plate of the compass through a small glass he had produced from his jacket. Now he looked up. "The deviation table is intact," he said, and there was something almost broken in his voice. "Do you understand what this is? We have doctrine going back 5 decades built on this technique. We teach it. We've never had the original. We've never had proof of where it came from or who paid for it." He set the glass down. "The men who came up with this are ghosts to us, literal ghosts. And one of them is standing in a gun in an auction house in Maine telling me he fixes boat engines." "Outboards mostly," Edrin said mildly. "Some inboards. There's good work in a fishing town if you keep your head down." And then for the first time all morning the old man laughed, a short, dry surprise sound, as though he had not expected to find anything funny ever again, and Caleb laughed too, helplessly, and even Agent Reyes's mouth twitched. And for one strange moment the impossible weight of 50 years lifted off the room, and there were just 4 people standing around a small brass compass, alive, in the morning light. But the laughter did not last, because there was still the question of what came next. And Edrin Vale knew better than anyone that the people who had buried the lattice were still out there, older now but not gone, and that a secret refusing to die makes powerful men afraid. "Here is what's going to happen," Edrin said, and the command that Caleb had glimpsed earlier was fully in his voice now, the voice of a man who had once given orders that sent ships to the bottom of a winter sea. "I am not going to vanish a second time. I'm old and I'm dying, and I have nothing left to protect except the truth. The compass stays documented. The serial stays in the registry. This young man," he nodded at Caleb, "is a witness, and so are you two, and so were 40 people at that auction. If anyone decides Kestrel needs to drown again, they'll have to drown all of us, and that's a great many bodies for a secret that's already 50 years stale." He looked at Agent Mara. "But if your newer people meant what they said about a debt, then I want one thing, not for me. For the 3 who didn't make it to shore. I want their names off the survey accident lie and onto something true. I want it written down somewhere that they existed, that they did what they did, and that it mattered." Mara was quiet for a long moment. "That's not a small thing to ask." "I'm not asking for a small thing," Edrin Vale said. "I'm asking for the only thing." The 2 agents looked at each other, and something passed between them, years of partnership compressed into a glance, and then Mara nodded, once. Reyes carefully, almost tenderly, screwed the backplate of the compass closed and set it down in front of Caleb, not in front of himself. Leaving it, Caleb understood deliberately, with the witness, where it could not quietly disappear. "It'll take time," Mara said. There are people who'll fight it. Declassification doesn't move fast, and there are men still living who would rather it never moved at all. I've got a season, Edrin said. Maybe two. Move faster than that. It took less than that, in the end. Though Edrin Vale did not live to see all of it, he saw the beginning. That was enough. In the weeks that followed, Caleb Strand learned what it meant to become a keeper of someone else's truth. The compass moved into a locked case behind the auction house counter, and a copy of everything. The photographs, the serial, the encoded deviation table, the recorded statement Edrin gave one grey afternoon at the cataloguing table with Mara's small recorder running, went into 3 places at once, because the old man insisted, because a careful man keeps redundancy, because a truth in one place is a truth that can be lost. Edrin came by most days that autumn. He would sit at the long table and tell Caleb things, not all of them about the lattice, sometimes just about the sea, about magnetic north and true north, and the difference between where the world is and where it tells you it is, about the small town and the half-century of mornings he had spent in it being no one. Caleb wrote it all down. He had a gift for listening to things people threw away, and he had come to understand that Edrin Vale was, in his own eyes, a thing that had been thrown away, and that the writing down was a kind of recovery. "Why me?" Caleb asked him once. "You could have left it to anyone. A museum, a reporter. Why a kid who sells dead people's clutter?" The old man considered the question for a while. "Because you raised your hand," he said finally. "At the auction, nobody else did. The whole room laughed and you watched me not laugh, and you raised your hand for a broken compass for no reason you could explain." He looked at the locked case. 50 years I waited for someone who'd noticed that the weight was wrong. You weren't supposed to be the one. You were just the one who looked closely. That's the whole of it, in the end. Most things that matter are found by people who simply looked closely when everyone else was laughing. Edrin Vale died in February. The same month, Caleb noticed that he was supposed to have died half a century before. It was quiet. A heart that had carried too much for too long simply set the weight down. He had no family that anyone knew of, which was the cruelest detail of his erasure, and the truest. And so it was Caleb who arranged the small service, and Caleb who stood at the graveside in the salt wind with Agent Mara, who had driven up without being asked, and stood at a respectful distance, with her hands folded in front of her, square-shouldered, the way she had stood in the auction house. "The petition went through," she told him afterward, by the cars. "Partial declassification. It'll be public next year. A limited acknowledgement of the program, the dates, the contested operations, and the 3. She paused. "Their names are going on a wall, a real one. With the truth, or as much of it, as we're allowed to carve in stone, which is more than they ever expected to allow." She looked at Caleb. "He'll be on it too, under his own name, Edrin Vale. Kestrel, lost at sea February 1971, recovered to the record February." She stopped. "We argued about the dates for a week. In the end we wrote the truth, both of them. Died once in 71. Came home anyway. Died again. Found. In the same cold month. 50 years on." Caleb could not speak for a moment. The wind moved through the dry grass. "He wanted it for them," he finally said. "Not for himself. The 3 who didn't reach shore." "I know," Mara said. "We gave him both." When the acknowledgement became public the following year, it was not a headline that stopped the world. These things rarely are. It was 3 paragraphs in an official release, clinical and careful, full of the bloodless language that governments use to say enormous things quietly. A limited maritime intelligence program conducted in contested waters between 1969 and 1972 was acknowledged. Certain operational losses previously recorded as a survey vessel accident were reclassified. The program's personnel were posthumously recognized. No names in the release. But the names were elsewhere, carved where Mara had promised, and on the day the wall was unveiled, Caleb drove a long way to stand in front of it, and he found the 4 names he was looking for, and beside the last one, Edrin's, someone had left a small brass object on the granite ledge. It was not the compass. The compass was in a museum case by then, behind glass, with a placard that told as much of the story as could be told, and Caleb had loaned it himself, on the one condition that the placard used the old man's real name. The thing on the ledge was just an ordinary marine compass, cheap, modern, the kind you could buy in any harbor shop. Someone had left it pointing, deliberately, west of north. Caleb never learned who. He liked to think it was Mara. He liked to think it was one of the newer people Edrin had bet his last season on, the ones who believed in a debt. But he never asked, and no one ever told him, and in the end, it did not matter. The point of it was clear enough. The point was that someone else knew. The secret that had been built to die with 9 men had outlived all of them, and was loose in the world now, and could not be drowned again. Caleb still works at the auction house, though he runs it now. He still has a gift for looking at corroded, discarded, overlooked things and seeing the lives that carried them. But he looks differently now. When a man brings in a box of his dead father's tools, or a woman sets down a tarnished medal she cannot explain, Caleb does not laugh, and he does not hurry, and he does not call anything a paperweight. He picks it up. He feels the weight of it. And if the weight is wrong, if the weight is somehow more than it has any right to be, he takes it to the long table in the back, and he gets his small screwdriver, and he opens it up to see. Because the old man taught him the one thing that the men who built the lattice never understood, the thing that all their burying and erasing and drowning could never quite kill. A secret is only as strong as the silence around it. And silence, in the end, is just a truth waiting for someone who looks closely. The compass pointed west of north for 50 years, insisting on what looked like a lie, holding the real heading hidden inside the false one, waiting. And one Saturday, a young man who collected broken things raised his hand in a laughing room and paid $22 and listened. If this story moved you, share it with someone who believes the overlooked deserve to be seen. And if you believe that some truths refuse to stay buried, no matter how deep they're sunk, no matter how many years pass, no matter how many people agree to forget, then subscribe. Because there are more of them out there. More people who were erased, more objects that hold the proof, more needles pointing patiently away from north, waiting for someone to notice that the weight is wrong, and to open them up, and to finally read the truth that was hidden inside the lie all along.